Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
How about a window into the future? Expansion, realignment, expanded playoffs. I mean, Can you see that down the road?
I can. I think the first two topics are related in my mind. I think if we expand, it provides us with an opportunity to geographically realign. I think we could save a lot of wear and tear on our players in terms of travel.
This is major, Mad Dog. Big changes potentially for Major League Baseball. What's your reaction?
Well, first off, give the commissioner credit. He takes some chances. He brought the pitch clock in, 3-batter rule for the relievers. He's not, Bristol, Tennessee, games in London, Williamsport. He's not afraid to take some chances. He said this with David Cohn there on a Sunday night game this past week. I think the two cities before Rob retires in 29 are going to be Salt Lake City and Nashville. I think they put Nashville in the East. I think they put Salt Lake City in the West. And I do think you'll see 8 divisions of 4 teams. The one thing I'm worried about, everybody says we'll put the Yankees, the Mets, the Phillies, and the Red Sox in the same division. You can't have 4 big market, major market, big spenders in the same division and then have the Brewers, Twins, White Sox, and Kansas City in another division. You got to balance out the power so you don't have 4 heavyweights in the same division. The one thing about the travel, I understand travel. I get it. Yeah. But remember, with interleague, the Yankees go to L.A. and San Diego. There's so much travel now anyway. I'm not too sure what the travel aspect of it is. But I do think, and Stephen A. will comment here, I do think you will see some sort of alignment by the end of the decade. And I'm all for it. Just be careful of not putting so many of the big spending teams in the same divisions.
Stephen A., do you like this?
I agree. I agree with that part, Doggy. Here's what I would tell you. I have an idea. I don't mind it replicating the NBA to some degree. I don't give a damn about division winners in baseball anymore. American League East, National League East, Central, West, whatever. I'm sorry, give me the top teams in the divisions, the top 7 best records. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not the case now in the conference. I'm not saying that that's the case right now, but I'm just talking about just looking at it that way. I could care less about division winners per se, which dictate matchups to some degree. I could care less about that. Me personally, I just want to see the top teams. That's how I look at it. I'm not saying that's not the case. Go ahead.
No, you put one and 6 in one, 1 and 6 in the other. I'm okay with that too. Who cares who wins the American League Central? There is some truth to that with what Stevie said. And the NBA, does anybody care who wins the Midwest Division in the NBA? Nobody cares.
Nobody.
So you can make that argument too.
Cares.
But I do think something's afoot with baseball.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hello there, everybody. How are you? My name is Tim Hanlon, and this is my little show. We like to call it Good Seats Still Available. It's our curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. We thank you for coming on by. Pull up a chair and sit down and enjoy the festivities this week as we go back to the baseball extravaganza that is amidst us now in September as the playoff hunt gets a little bit more exciting and the postseason is literally on our proverbial doorstep. And our guest this week, Jane Leavy, is uniquely positioned to opine about the current state of Major League Baseball and its potential future. And we're just excited as all get out to have her on this week's episode, especially given her brand new book, as we're going to get into, comes out tomorrow on the 9th of September. We drop this on the 8th. If you're listening in real time or as soon as we drop it, her book is called Make Me Commissioner. I Know What's Wrong with Baseball and How to Fix It. Now, it's a pretty bold statement, but the bona fides that Jane brings to the table are unquestioned. She is a legendary and rule-breaking and boundary-chasing sports writer, female sports writer at that, earning her stripes at the Washington Post in the late 1970s, early 1980s. She covered a ton of different sports, but baseball was, as you'll hear in our conversation, her first love from childhood and has wound up becoming her passion and her professional expertise, I think you could easily say, especially given the amazing trove of biography that she has delivered over the last number of years. And if you haven't read her 3 major baseball biographies of Mickey Mantle, called The Last Boy, of Sandy Koufax, called The Lefty's Legacy, or her most recent one about the big fella, Babe Ruth. Each of those 3 books are tour de forces or tours de force. I don't know how you say that in French, but they are amazing in their totemic qualities, if you will. They are by far the quintessential books about each of those players, and each of them notoriously challenging as individuals to either get close to or understand, or in the case of Babe Ruth, pry through the hagiography and the various stories, both real and not so real, to get through to the truth. I highly recommend each of those 3 books if you've not partaken of them before, but only stands to reason that this book, as I've had the pleasure of reading in preparation for this conversation, gives it that much more heft as it comes into the marketplace. And we are going to get into not only Jane's background and how baseball sort of became part of her life, both personally and professionally, but also, frankly, her opinions, as the book hints, about what baseball is all about now and where it might go for better or for worse, with some suggestions and ideas about where perhaps it should go, given that long history of her reportage of the sport. Again, the name of the book is called Make Me Commissioner: I Know What's Wrong with Baseball and How to Fix It. It is published by our friends at Grand Central Publishing. And as of tomorrow, when we drop this episode, September 9th, it is available wherever you find good books. If you'd like to go through our website and give us a couple of shekels of referral love by doing so, we'd appreciate that. All you got to do is go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, search up this episode number 411 with me and Jane, and you'll find a couple of convenient links there to Amazon, who will send this book to you in whatever form it's available in, including Kindle, I think. I'm pretty sure. And like I said, we'll get a little referral spiff to help us keep our lights on. And we appreciate that tremendously. I highly encourage you also to listen through to the entirety of this episode, because at the end of this conversation, we're going to have a little trivia question. We're going to give away a copy of Jane's new book. So stay tuned for that question. And we'll encourage you to send in your answers and for hopefully for your sake to win a copy of this amazing book. And it certainly stirs up a lot of conversation. We're going to get to that in just a second. But I also highly encourage you to go back into our catalog, because there are a lot of different nibbles around some of the topics we're going to be discussing here when it comes to baseball's future. We've done a bunch of different episodes on the A's, for example, the seemingly peripatetic A's, both from Philadelphia's perspective and in Kansas City, and of course, most of late Oakland, as they potentially, we think, still move to Las Vegas at some point. Our episode number 291 with the great Jesse Cole, which is about 2+ years ago. And for a number of you out there, it was your first taste of this thing called the Savannah Bananas, which we will discuss in fairly great length with Jane in a minute, and what they've meant for baseball, both positively and potentially in a challenging manner. Our episode 288, for example, with the great Miles Wolff, who was arguably the dean of minor league baseball. We talk about the minors and their role and its role in Major League Baseball's future and how tightly wound it now is, and if that's a good thing or not. Lots and lots of good stuff. And hey, let's not waste any more time. This is a wonderful chat with an amazing sports writer and person. Her name is Jane Leavy, and I am just honored to have had this conversation and present it to you now. Please, as always, enjoy. maybe for our audience too, who are of a certain age or maybe not of a certain age, a little bit of background about you. You are a well-versed and well-regarded sports writer, not only from the traditional journalism days, but just some mammoth biographies, especially in the realm of baseball. Maybe a little bit of background as to how you got into journalism in the first place and why so much depth and just amazingness in baseball itself.
Well, I actually really like being superficial, but it doesn't come naturally to me. I'm a notorious over-reporter. I was told that in my days at the Washington Post. You got enough. Stop. Remember the old axiom, go with what you got. No, thank you. Let's go get more and then go with that stuff. That's sort of my MO. So how do I explain this?
Well, I mean, you like the long form, right? Which is, saying something, right? That's obviously where books, especially the last couple of years, have really come into play, right? But how'd you get your start though, and how'd you get into sports, and then affix yourself more to baseball as you advanced in your career?
It's my father's fault, and he's been dead since 2003. He was known as Mort the Sport, at least to me. He was a garrulous, chubby, tough competitor at the net who grew up at 178th in Amsterdam and spent most of his childhood that he could sitting on Coogan's Bluff overlooking the Polo Grounds, where his father, my grandfather, who I never met because he died young, was known as a bookie and a rum runner. And so my good stock goes back to the Polo Grounds and my dad's watching. And actually my father was, as a perk of his father's industry, my dad got to be water boy for the New York Football Giants in 1927. I think that was the highlight of his life. And he was really actually a very good athlete despite his dimensions, and communicated that to me and with me on our endless sojourns through Long Island, and basically every weekend, because my mother hated the sound of Aldi Regattas and pretty much any other sports broadcaster, and banished those games from her parlor. So I would go out and drive around with my dad. We'd chase fire engines and the AM's signal for whatever game he wanted to listen to, and talk sports. Also, I was the second of two daughters. I think my identity was formed in part in relation to my sister, who really liked paper dolls, and so I had to do something different. So I liked balls and strikes. And he would indulge me. He really he became a great Mets fan, and this is a true story. On his deathbed, I was reading to him game stories from the New York Post, the Times, Daily News, back when the Mets really stunk, and
Please narrow it down.
August 2003, okay. And he trying to find something that could take his mind off the pain he was in, and so I just kept reading these game stories until they came to get him for surgery. And literally his last words to me on this mortal coil were, "Oi, the Mets." And that he bequeathed me not the Mets, but baseball, because my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, lived at 751 Walton Avenue, which a building that still exists. It had a crest, a stained glass crest in the window of crossed bats over a heraldic shield. And though I was too young to understand geography, and that we were facing the wrong way, she was only one short block from Yankee Stadium. and I could hear the thwacks and I could hear the roar of the crowd bouncing off the buildings as it traveled, up this 157th Street towards me, and I would fantasize that there I was telling Hector Lopez everything he was doing wrong, which wasn't, which was not a short list.
Well, okay. Well, how did you grow up then, fandom wise? Were you a Mets fan, a Yankees fan?
Yankees fan.
Okay, because of that experience.
Yeah, the proximity to my grandmother, who was in my mind sainted, though Jewish, and who took me by the hand, despite it being against her inclinations, to go on the then CC train that left, the IND CC train that left 161st and Riverside, River Avenue, sorry, down to 50th Street to Saks Fifth Avenue to buy me a baseball glove. Why would you ask? Why, you ask, would she go to Saks Fifth Avenue? Because she only knew where to shop for the best.
Sure, of course.
And that's what she wanted for me. And by pure fluke, it must have been very near opening day, and there was a mannequin in the window. I mean, I can see it still. She had very wavy, sort of auburn-ish hair, and a Yankee jersey on, and a glove on her left hand. And so my grandmother said, "We'll have that for my granddaughter." And the very flummoxed salesman said, "Oh, madam, that's not for sale." And my grandmother replied, "Oh, we'll have that for my granddaughter." We went home with the homeliest, worst glove. Who knows how it made its way into Saks Fifth Avenue's window. It was a Sam Esposito glove, perhaps one of two that existed in the universe. And when we went to high holiday services, her synagogue, which was quite small, needed to have more room for what are sometimes known as revolving door Jews, who show up for the high holidays and little else. And so they would hold their services in the Concourse Plaza Hotel, which was at that time the swankiest place in the Bronx.
Absolutely.
It's where all the, Yankee homecoming lunches were. It's where you had a bar mitzvah. It's where the Bronx borough president, declared his candidacy. And it had a second floor at a balustrade. And it was a conservative synagogue. So the women prayed separately from the men. And my grandmother would usher me past the front door into the putative synagogue with my Sammy Esposito glove, clutched to my body, and my body encased in her mink coat, which I was convinced she bought big enough to accommodate me and Sammy Esposito. In fact, my sister broke my heart by telling me later, no, she got it a size too big because it was on sale. So
Such a deal.
Such a deal. So either way, Sammy and I made the trek to the Concourse Plaza, and she would listen to the shofar blowing for the new year, and I would listen to my transistor radio while wrapped up in the huge brocade drapes on these incredibly tall windows. I mean, you can still see how tall those windows are if you're up at the stadium, though of course the stadium has moved across 161st Street. So that was a kind of synthesis. To be near my grandmother was to be near the Yankees. To be near the Yankees was to be near my grandmother. And when she died, what did I have left? Hector Lopez.
How did your fandom, though, growing up as a baseball fan, I'm guessing sports generally too, when do you start to ideate and or manifest a career in doing something in and around baseball, in particular journalism or writing or ideating anything around how you could be part of that world?
That is never a word I have used in a single sentence as it pertains to myself, but I'll answer it as best I can. It wasn't until I was ready to graduate or had graduated from college, Barnard College in the city of New York, at the great Columbia University, which has bowed its knee to Donald Trump, like so many others in the Ivy League, much to my amazement. And I was an English major and studied very, very relevant things like the music of the spheres from in Renaissance, Renaissance iconography.
Sure, the resume just writes itself when you're looking for that first job. Sure,
exactly. And I was all set to go to graduate school because I'd gotten a scholarship, not at Columbia, but elsewhere. And my mother looked at me one day, and I had gotten a job that I'd been in, I don't know, 6 months or so as an assistant at a publishing house, GP Putnam's, where my assignment was to keep my employer, my editor, upright after lunch and to do some of his editing. And one day my mother said to me, what is it you really want to do? And I said, I want to be Red Smith. And it literally was like a week, maybe days before the applications were due for Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. And I applied. I wrote the most disgustingly effete essays for admission, and based on a book called Homo Ludens, Man the Player, which is really a great book, but it was very English majory of me. And I have no idea why they took me. It's a good they didn't want GREs, which is a really good thing because I couldn't take tests. I got a 320 on my math GRE, and you got 200 points for signing your name. So they took me. Go figure. And when they said we have to do a master's essay, it was a 1-year program, and we had to come up with a topic. Everybody else wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. I wanted to be Red Smith. And the dean of the school was Ellie Abel, who was a wonderful journalist and a great newsman for NBC. And he was wise enough to see that this path was a really good other path to take. Robert Frost would have, approved. But anyway, so I wrote my master's essay which is basically a long magazine article on Red Smith, which meant that I followed him around to ball games and I sat with him in this little barn he had behind his house in New Canaan, Connecticut. And he had the best photograph. I looked for it for this book and didn't find it anywhere. Maybe somebody will recognize what I'm talking about. It's a picture of Yogi Berra squatting behind home plate at a totally empty Yankee Stadium. Whoever set that up, knew a sight gag when he saw one. So there's Yogi looking out at the field and at the grandstands, and there's nobody but him in the ballpark. And of course, he put it, across from the commode, which made it even funnier. And I would sit by his side and, say, well, now, why did you make the sentence this way? And he very patiently, in what he called the croak of an old crock, explained to me about his inner voice and his inner ear and what he listened for, and the rhythms he listened for, and the kind of style moves. He called them moves, like boxing moves they stole from other writers coming up in the business. And I remember him saying, sooner or later, those moves become your own, and you've got your own moves to add to it, and you find your voice. And of course, his was a glorious voice and glorious prose. And the best story is that I went with him to the 19 1976. Boy, I'm aging myself here, but okay. 1976 AFC, I think it was the championship game at Three Rivers.
Sure, it sounds about right. Steelers and don't quiz me on it.
And it was the Raiders.
Raiders,
And
sure.
I don't think it was the Immaculate Reception game, but frankly, I was paying no attention to the game, so it's natural that I wouldn't remember a thing about it. All I knew was that he had gotten me credentials that hung around my neck. It said Red Smith, New York Times, which gained me admission to my first press box, which unfortunately, unlike the one he was in, was unheated. And I had not come prepared for that. So at halftime, this wonderfully gallant, decent man, who was, of course, the lead columnist for the New York Times on a big sports day, went inside and sat in the lounge behind the bar with me and watched the second half on television, again with me at his elbow saying, now, why did you write Stallworth's coach rather than the coach of Stallworth, other than the economy of words? And he would explain, exactly what he was getting at. And after the game was over and the Steelers were victorious, he and the entire male press corps toddled all down to the bowels of the stadium where the hallways seemed very small because when they were filled with, football players, they seemed like the walls were very, very close together. And I followed them and stopped in front of the Raiders' defeated locker room. And there's a Pinkerton guard there who had to be 6'7", maybe 120 pounds, soaking wet. And I looked up at him and smiled, and he looked down at me and smiled. And I sort of held my press credential out to show him. And he goes, "You're Red Smith?" And I nodded as mildly and as modestly as I knew Red would have done. And he said, "Well, go right in." So, it's a pretty bare kind of setup in there. And the players were sitting on wooden benches on the left, still completely clothed. I think they would have had to defrost before they could have peeled those things off of them. I remember the sound of Cliff Branch's teeth chattering. And I saw that, and then I quickly looked to my right, and there was John Madden in short sleeve shirt, with his big head and his big hands and his elbows on his desk, looking miserable. And he looks up and he sees me, and he goes, "Who the fuck is she?" And Pinkerton goes, "Oh, don't worry, Mr. Madden, she's Red Smith." And I got shoot out of there pretty fast, but it also, that's a story you dine out on for years. And that was my first experience. But that was the first time I went into and got thrown out of a locker room.
Yeah, but you made more than your share of accolades and that. I mean, being a woman in the very male chauvinistic world of sports writing and all that stuff. I mean, you more than held your own. I mean, you stood out and on a whole bunch of different fronts. But you always returned to baseball, though, especially when you went to your longer writing career, right? I mean, to do these masterful biographies of people like Sandy Koufax and Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and stuff. I mean, that had to be a passion kind of project for you once you want to maybe step outside of the day-to-day sports writing biz.
You make it sound like it was organized and predestined. And in fact, what happened was a guy who had been a friend of mine when I still lived in New York, and he had been an editor at the New York Daily News magazine. His name is David Hershey.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But we know David Hershey from his days covering the New York Cosmos of the old NASL. But I digress.
Know. And Shep Messing was on that team. And Shep
absolutely
was the son of my parents' friends from, I think, maybe the dad would have been in the army with my father. I'm not sure. But, I hung out with Shep and his brother Albie. I loved that name, Albie. Anyway, so David called me up and said, "How'd you like to write a book about Sandy Koufax?" It wasn't my idea, And I said, oh, hell no. I hated him for what he did to Mickey Mantle. And wiser folks than I prevailed upon me to say, that's kind of stupid. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And I had to write, people don't realize you have to write a proposal. And the agent that I work for is particularly exacting in the proposals that he will send on to publishers. So that was like, 6 months, 9 months of work. And it was contingent upon reaching Sandy Koufax, which of course his reputation preceded him as being inaccessible. And I never expected to speak to him, to meet him, to have dinner with him, to share a bottle of wine with him, nothing. And I wrote letters to Don Fear, who was then the head of the Baseball Players Association, and to, let's see, Fred Wilpon, his friend from Lafayette High School in Brooklyn. And I explained the book I would want to write. And they were good enough to send the letters to him. And because they came from those two guys and not me, he opened them, read them, and called me. And I wasn't home. I missed his call. What are the chances he's going to call back? He said he would call back, but everybody knows nobody calls back. If they call once, that's a big deal. But so I sat glued to the telephone for the next couple of days, and sure as hell, he called back and he said, "This is Sandy." And he never says Koufax because he's one of those people on a first name basis with America. And he said, "Hello, Ms. Leavy." And he pronounced it right. So I thought, oh my God, now I'm in love. And he's also incredibly well-mannered, and his mother must have been an incredibly good mother because he has the best manners of anybody I've ever met. And I somehow instinctively knew that. I don't know how. So I started talking and did not shut up for a good hour, and he didn't interrupt. And I told him all about myself, all about my kids, all about what I wanted to do, all about hating his guts because of what he did to Mickey. And when I finally came up for air, he said, well, I still don't have any interest in your project, but if you want to come down to Vero and talk to me, that would be fine. Well, that's like, that's much further than I ever expected to get. So I go down to Vero and meet him at Dodgertown. And he says he still doesn't have any interest in my project, but here's what he's willing to do. He said, I would rather it not be done at all, but if it's going to be done, I want it to be done right. So these are my prerequisites. Please don't talk to the children of my sister, his late sister Edie. I really don't want them to have to be mixed up in, a public document about me. I had no problem making that agreement. I also, on my own volition, not that I told him it, but I also didn't call up his ex-wives. By that point, there were two of them. What do ex-wives say? And that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. So he agreed that he would allow me to call him to check any fact that I wanted. And he's such an honorable human being that if you ask him a question, he'll tell you the truth. And I wasn't allowed to quote him, did not want to be quoted. He still refers to me as a nice lady and who wrote an unauthorized biography. So, which, put it on my gravestone if I have one, right? But I could always call him up and say, did this happen this way? I've heard this or that. And he also said, you can tell people when you ask to speak to them that they can check with me and I'll tell them it's all right to talk to you. I wasn't that young, but I was pretty dumb. I didn't have any sense of what a gift that was. from a subject to a biographer. He didn't want anything from me. He didn't want power to read, and make changes in the last edit. He didn't want money. He wanted hands-off distance is what he wanted, but he gave me the truth. And so that's as rare a deal as you'll ever find. And of course,
I was gonna say, but what a way to, what an intro into the book world, right? Because if you could have not been given a more seemingly impossible task than to unravel the enigma that was Sandy Koufax. This is a guy who, beyond his on-field performance and stuff, he's like a recluse in many respects.
No, that's part of the thing that frankly bugs me still. People still think that the mythology that he's a recluse and somehow some kind of a misanthrope, they still buy it, even though the book documents how that is clearly not true, and how what he was publicly in his public facing was not needful of the kind of attention that comes with being as famous as Sandy Koufax is. He did not emotionally, psychologically, to be whole in the rest of his life after he quit pitching at age 30. He did not need to continue to be famous to know who he was. And that's very rare among athletes. He didn't need the money, which was, certainly helpful. But he more and more, better stated is to say that he had the imagination to conceive a full and whole life without being Sandy Koufax in neon. And that's the life he went on to lead. That conveys to people the impression that he was somehow in hiding or unpleasant to people. He was never unpleasant to people. You talk about a stand-up guy in the locker room. People didn't ask the questions they ask today, for better or for worse, but he was always there to answer the questions. And he, I saw his kind of fame, remember, when he was at the height of his fame, it's 20 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. And here he is, this incredibly handsome, incredibly coordinated, incredibly smart Jewish man who is at the apogee of the new prophets. And I watched him come out of a game. I was with him, so I saw it. We came out of Camden Yards, and the parking lot was empty. And somehow it went from empty to swarming with people who saw him, recognized him, and surrounded him in an instant. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And he's never rude. He'll always sign some autographs. He'll always answer a question. He just didn't want it to be the life he led. He didn't need fame the way Tommy Lasorda did, or the way Larry King did. And he did not want to live off of who he had been. So did he disappear? Yeah, he did, a year or two on his contract with NBC to be a broadcaster. But with this personality, it wasn't exactly shocking that, he wasn't the most garrulous broadcaster ever.
Yeah.
and quickly tired of it, and gave back the money that was still on the contract. So, he in favor of, he moved around a bunch, but, lived in California and rode horses. He became a really good golfer and a cabinet maker, and he knows more about wine than you or me or anybody listening to this. When people ask me what he did with the rest of his life, I usually say he educated himself. There isn't a book I've read and recommended to him that he hasn't already read, and will come back with one that he says is better. And he's usually right.
Why do you think he retreated though? But from the game per se, and I'm sure that's probably where those misconceptions come from, is that the game perhaps on occasion looks to bring him back into the spotlight and celebrate and all that kind of stuff, or have him more active. And you describe a guy who's kind of, if you will, moved on many different levels. Why do you think he retreated?
That's also a misconception, to be honest. He worked as a roving pitching coach in the minor leagues for the Dodgers for years. And, maybe nobody noticed, but he was there. So he did not retreat from the game. And I don't know a single young pitcher who has made his way to him and asked for help in, fixing his career or developing his career, that Sandy turned away. His lessons when he would show up at Mets spring training or at Dodgers spring training are legendary. And he studied physics to understand the principles of the delivery and how you mastered it and made it its most efficient delivery of energy, from a small 10-inch hill to a plate 60 feet 6 inches away. So I don't really buy that he retreated. He then actually had a deal for a while with the Dodgers after that, to show up for public events at the ballpark. And he did that routinely. But frankly, that went out the window when my book was published, and someone wrote or leaked or whatever a nefarious and untrue rumor in what was then called, page 6. And it was, what was that little thing that they were just hearing? No, it was for blind items. Just asking.
Yeah.
What left-handed Hall of Fame pitcher cooperated with his biographer because she threatened to reveal he was gay? Well, there's fiction.
Wow.
I didn't threaten, and he's not gay. But the publisher of the book and the publisher of the newspaper were both Rupert Murdoch, who and Fox at that point owned the Dodgers. So he went to Ebbets Field and collected all his trophies and went home. And he's a pretty principled guy. Now that ended when it was sold, and he had a fair amount to do with the team during the Frank McCourt era, and he does now. He's friends with the owner, and he shows up there. But give the guy a break. He's 89 years old now, and while he looked fabulous at the Hall of Fame, he's getting up there. And
sure. A true living legend, right? And there's nobody, but it is. Do you keep in touch with him at all? Do you trade notes at all?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, and who would have thunk it, right? He actually came to my daughter's bat mitzvah.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It was fantastic.
Well, there could not be. I mean, so to be able to do a biography of that substance and of that type of enigmatic character, right? Because he's a very complicated
no, he's not enigmatic.
You don't think so?
No.
I think to the outside world, he kind of is.
You're talking about appearances as opposed to reality.
Probably.
And the man, some people ask me all the time, "Oh, what did he think of your book?" As far as I know, I haven't checked recently, but as far as I know, the last time I asked, his wife told me, Jane is her name also, that, he hasn't read it. And I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because if he was somebody who was running to read what I'd had to say about him, he wouldn't be the guy I described in the book." Now, I am sure other people that he trusted and is close to read it and told him, whatever they said about it. But they didn't say something that made him avoid me. Let's put it that way. and it's not an enigma. What we live in an insane culture where being public is the goal, being noticed, getting clicks, doing horrible things for notoriety,
Attention, yeah.
is the norm. He's the normal one. He's somebody who is self-sufficient in ego and in accomplishment and in his relationships, and he doesn't need the whole world to be davening at his feet. That's not to say he's oblivious to the advantages that his name brought. He got good tables, he got tickets, he got, there were bennies, but I don't think he's an enigma. At least not if you read my book.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I want to do a hard gear shift to the current book because ostensibly what we're here to help you promote and stuff. And I just, I think that the timing of it is exquisite, right? Given all the changes that have happened in baseball over the last couple of years and the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, as we record this, Rob Manfred spouted out even more heresies, it seems, over the weekend around realignment and all that kind of stuff. What got to you to put pen to paper on this particular topic about baseball, its state, and frankly, it's beautifully written in that it's not only critical, but you also have hefty dollops of hope and promise embedded in there too. But why this particular topic? What was it that drove you to kind of write in this fashion about the state of the game?
Well, as you know from having read it, Betty the dog is a main character. Betty's my 8-year-old Labradoodle, Partee Labradoodle, and she is the mascot for the Orleans Firebirds in the Cape Cod League, the best college summer league where the guys have to learn to hit with a wooden bat and show what they can do. So Betty's just wandered off into, had you let me keep the camera on, you'd be able to see her in all of her gorgeous.
Send me a picture. We'll make sure we'll put that part of the social media when we've.
You got it, babe. Excuse me. It was the inability to find someone else to write about whose life begged to be told. Now that is because I have two rules for myself. One is if I think somebody, whether it's baseball or anywhere else, has been given a literary treatment that is as good as it can get, I'm not going to go try to rewrite it. I mean, there'll be another Koufax book, there'll be another Mantle book. There already have been, and Babe books, but I don't want to be the rehasher. I want to be able to have my take and move on to something else. And the other one is if a friend of mine has written about a certain subject, I don't want to write anything that would compete, disagree, or otherwise. So I won't do something other friends have written about. And there are precious few baseball stories, when you take those out, that are worthy of telling. I mean, think about it. One of the great, what that told me is, one of the great deficiencies of modern baseball is stars of the magnitude of Koufax, Mantle, and Ruth. Who are they? Do you know anything about them? Does Major League Baseball find a way to promote them other than Ohtani, right? Who is a whole different species because of his global reach and fame. There really aren't any. The control over access to such athletes, unless they're dead, and then sometimes even then, is very much more limited. You can't really know these guys. There's layers of protection. I don't mean it in the dastardly sense of payola, but it is not easy to get past that paywall to get to know one of these guys. And people write clip jobs all the time. I'm not interested. So when I couldn't find a guy in baseball, and this book was going to be baseball for a variety of reasons that are not really that interesting, but it has to do with publishing and the fact that you get niched. It's easier to sell something that you've already got a reputation for. It was really damning to find out there was nobody left to write about. I'm not going to try to do better than Richard Med Kramer on DiMaggio. Really? I mean, no. I think Yogi's gotten really good treatment by a couple of guys I respect a lot. And more recently, Ricky Henderson, Howard Bryant's done a bunch of really fine biographies. And I just don't want to go there. So, either they will appear as worthy subjects later after their careers are over, which will probably be too late for me. But, what do you think the chances were if I went to get Derek Jeter and offered him the deal that Koufax offered me, that he would agree to it?
Yeah, not in this day and age, no.
No.
Nor the dynamic of the personalities involved these days because of things, right? It's we're in a different era on a whole different bunch of different levels.
Right. So it's easier to write about dead guys. It's way easier to write about dead guys, which is what most biographers do.
Well, why but the thing about baseball though, you felt that there was still some meat there in the sport itself, yeah?
Sure. First of all, as I think I say somewhere in this overlong book, I'm the person who never fell out of love with the game. So many people I know, even, Koufax said, I was at a breakfast with him and Joe Torre and at the Holy of Holies, the Oda Saga, on induction weekend one year. And, they're talking about today's game and how different it is from the game they played. And, Joe says it's hard to watch. And Sandy says, I don't watch. And it's true, he's in the majority there with a lot of fans who have just gave up on it as it got longer and longer. I mean, all my old friends who said nothing happens turned out to be right. How many times did a ball get put in play in 1920? I mean, versus, 2019. It had become it's stuck in quicksand. Nothing happened. And the changes that needed to be made structurally to solve the problems that are confronting it now were avoided over a long period of time. And I'm talking about the financial consequences of there not being a national TV package that they all share from the way the NFL does, meaning that the Royals might get $40 million for their TV rights while the Dodgers get how many billion?
Yeah, greatly disproportionate.
Great. And so geography has become, as it expands, and you're dependent in baseball on your local market to generate money, the money to operate.
And the exploitation of that by the bigger markets like the Yankees, for example, or the Dodgers, right? For sure.
Right. And so the inequities went unaddressed. If they were recognized, they threw up their hands. I don't know what happened. They just weren't addressed. But a very good friend of mine is a wonderful economist and teaches at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, Michael Halpert, explained to me, I said, well, why didn't they keep up? Why did they just sort of shrug their shoulders when Pete Rozelle came over, into the public realm and started promoting the hell out of the NFL in ways that have made it still the behemoth of sports, right? Despite the fact that it's making people stupid by playing it. Uh, why did they not change when cable packages started coming in? Why were they, did they just stick and adhere to the old model of finance that they're still stuck with? And he explained to me that there's a principle in economics called path dependence. So the example he used was go back to the 70s when the Japanese started making small cars and we're still driving, gigantic things with big fenders and lots of chrome that are gas guzzlers. And Detroit is trying to decide, should we switch over? Should we compete in that market, or do we just keep doing what we've been doing because it's always worked so well for us? And that's the path that baseball took. And in some ways, you can't blame them. This isn't that some one person screwed this up. This was a history that dates back to the founding of the National League, and a guy in the Hall of Fame named William Hulbert, who had a lot to do with organizing the National League. And in order to get the Rowdies who owned those franchises back in the day to consent to a level of organization and uniformity in rules and how many games you played and how many players you had and the length of the season and stuff like that, he gave them rights to promotion in their neighborhood, in their locality, in perpetuity. Well, that evolves into radio rights. Okay, well, at the beginning, radio rights are pretty small. The airwaves don't go that far. But then by 1927, they are able to connect the East Coast and the West Coast for the World Series and for the big fight. But still, they didn't change. Television comes along. And again, at first it's small. So, what's the big schmear? But then it becomes cable and streaming, and they're still doing it the same old way. And that has really hampered the game a lot. It's the reason that Rob Manfred announced last spring, there's going to be a lockout in December 2026. I'm sorry, I just don't think that, you're starting a season, you have the new rules working more or less well, and you're going to tell fans, but don't get too involved because for sure we're going to have a lockout at the end of 26. I don't understand the logic of that. I just don't.
It sounds like, and this is the biggest thing against him, right? Amongst many, right? It's that it feels like he's a CEO running a business, and it doesn't really seem like it takes into account the fans and or the customers, so to speak, with that kind of language and posturing, right? It's clear he's playing to other audiences, not the fans.
Right. I'm not a good enough negotiator. My father would have been, to understand why this would have been a sensible thing, a shot across the bow then. And to say, well, you have to look at it as a new normal. And what's going to happen is, it's going to happen at the end of every collective bargaining agreement every 6 years. And it's really not a bad thing because it's like, having a 22 rather than a nuclear bomb. Now, if I'm listening to that and I'm a Joe Schmo fan and I have to pay for 7 different packages in order to get my team on my screen, for at least 2/3 of their games, you're going to say, what are they doing? So stuff like that is and it's not one person's fault. It's not it's not Manfred's fault.
Yeah.
This goes back to the 1880s. Sure, he should want the kind of television money that the NFL gets. And now he's really screwed because the whole system upon which this was founded, the local networks, are going belly up. And that's why there are, I think it's 6 teams this year, maybe it's changed, who have no local broadcast outlet. And so those teams are being broadcast by MLB. And his fondest dream is to have all 30, or actually he wants there to be 32, so that he can organize reorganize baseball into the kind of conferences that football and the NBA and hockey have, that would involve less travel. This is the thing you were referring to, I think, about what he had
Well,
said.
yeah, let's talk. I mean, you have a lot of different sort of areas of focus, and obviously we're going to publish, we're going to promote the hell out of the book and stuff for people to understand sort of all those dynamics and stuff. But what I mean, given that, what do you think about that sort of threatened or hinted realignment? I mean, with all due respect, right? The idea of an American League and a National League has effectively been hollowed out by now, right? With all the cross league stuff. I mean, it was a nice curiosity, a number of years ago when they had a couple of weekends where there was that kind of like a allowance of games across the leagues and stuff. But now there's really no distinction, right? So is this just the last leg of that, and of it all collapsing into quote unquote something called Major League Baseball without any of those things anymore?
That's certainly what they're aiming for. But my argument is that baseball is older than these other sports that were formed at times and promoted, into public prominence in very different era. And so, the NBA can change its rules every year, and everybody goes, yeah, that's great. No problem, because they're not as invested in the traditions and the history of the game as baseball has always been. They're in a real conundrum, because the numbers that define baseball and that were collected starting with Harry Chadwick back in the 1800s led to the analytic revolution. You couldn't have the analytic revolution in baseball without those numbers. Baseball had what no other sport had, which is called a clean data set. And yet they're indebted to history, and they're hampered by history. And that is a real conundrum. It isn't going to be easy to figure this out. At some point, you and I are going to be dead, maybe not that long from now for me, I don't know. And the people who are interested in baseball, if they still exist, won't care so much about the old rivalries between the Dodgers and the Giants and the Yankees and the Red Sox. But in the meantime, this is like saying to, a large portion of its fan base, go to hell. Forget everything you thought you knew about baseball. No, it doesn't matter. The problem with Rob's plan is it's too logical. It makes complete sense. Flying all over the country is not really a great way to treat baseball players. They're exhausted half the time. They're falling off their feet by the end of the season because of the amount of travel they do. So some kind of reorganization, sure, would make some sense. But this?
Well, look, I mean, today, I mean, you had Jason Stark in The Athletic today as we record this, right? Was talking about like, well, you say goodbye probably to the 162 game season then too, because of you might go down a bunch less, right? And then that really brings up the issue, right? I mean, you talk about analytics and modernization and stuff, and you go to task on making the game being too analytical, and it pushes off the casual fan, and yet it's obviously beholden to stats and all that stuff. So there's good with the bad. But the reality, though, is that once you start to, I mean, it seems like it's a slippery slope, right? Right. So if that realignment does happen, and the Yankees and the Mets and the Red Sox and the Phillies are all in the same division, okay, I mean, that's a shift that basically pushes any remaining older fans kind of off the cliff. Either you're with us or you're done. We're moving on. But when you start taking the schedule and moving it down a bunch of games and that kind of stuff, now you get into the hornet's nest of stats and comparisons, and all that stuff.
That Jim Cott said to me when I first started working on this, and this was before any rules changes had been imposed. Other than, I mean, there was already the DH in both leagues by then, but I started working on this just about when Theo signed up to be the czar of
Cubs.
baseball. And if you remember back then, the headlines were dire. Baseball's dying, baseball's dead, baseball's done. And I think the changes they made, belated as they were necessary and have worked pretty well.
I agree.
They just don't go far enough to undo the mess that they created for themselves. So do I care whether it goes back to 154 game season? No, I actually don't. Jim Cott thought, well, it should be 154 game season starting at Memorial Day and ending at Labor Day. That way baseball has carved out a period of time that it's actually got no competitors. Because remember, baseball used to own the summer. It doesn't own the summer. There's summer league basketball, there's summer league everything, there's so much metastasizing things to watch on television and versions of things. There'll be flag football leagues pretty soon too, because they recognize that they've got a problem and they're being proactive about it. So I'm not, and I don't really think you can compare statistics anyway, frankly, because of the steroid era. And because even though they've now got the black players in the Negro leagues and their statistics in the Hall of Fame, very, very belatedly, it's still almost an impossible comparison to make. So that would, a 154 game season wouldn't bother me. It might even help save a few pitching arms. You might think that that's not such a lot, but one of the proposals that I run up the flagpole in the book came from Dave Roberts, manager of the Dodgers. Would you want to pitch for the Dodgers this year? You'd end up, in surgery because they all have. Or for the Braves, I mean, they can't keep these guys on the field. He wanted to make it 154, maybe even a shorter than that season, to mirror the minor leagues and make sure that baseball is as Broadway is, goes dark on Mondays. No games. Give a manager a chance to figure out how to get fresh arms in there and figure out how to give people the blow, as they like to say in sports, give somebody a blow that they desperately need. And if there are less games that they have to pitch, so be it. I also think that the destruction of the pitching arms is, as sad as it is for many players, is in some ways worse for fans. You can't root for a guy if he's not there. I mean, they disappear for 14, 16 months. And, by the time they come back, they're 2 years older pretty much. And you don't know what they're going to have left. A lot of guys come back very well for a period of time. And there are still a lot of guys who are having revisions and come back pretty well. Ohtani being number one on that list. But you're saying to fans, basically, it is not important to us that you get to see the people you want to root for and that we should be making stars of, for the next 2 years. And that's so essential to fandom. Yes, people age out. Yes, some people have short careers and it's unavoidable, or they reach a height and it doesn't last long. But this is a whole other form of transgression. And it also destroys all the narratives. See, I'm more interested in the narratives that the game used to create because of the way it was organized and the stories it could tell than I am whether it's exactly the same measurement in terms of numbers of games or da. You can prorate it, okay? Fine, go ahead if you care about that. That's not where I live. Where I live is you can't get to see Clayton Kershaw and Madison Bumgarner face each other over a decade anymore and know there's going to be 10 or 11 times that they're going to go against each other as they did into the teens of this century, and say, okay, who's going to get who this time? Who's going to get the better of who? Those were relationships of a kind, those matchups. Same with the one pitcher batter matchups. Was Greg Maddux ever going to figure out Tony Gwynn? Was Koufax ever going to get Bad Henry out? You would go to the ballpark for that. That was a reason to go to the ballpark. A guy working on a perfect game is a reason to go to the ballpark. Well, you're not going to have any more of them when the average number of innings pitched for a starting pitcher is 5.2 innings. So you're basically taking away, again, the occasions and the standards of excellence that used to be, essential to being a baseball fan. I saw a no-hitter. How about that? Well, I saw the one in the 22 World Series where four Astros pitchers collaborated. And Javier started that game, and he was impeccable. I think I don't have it in front of me. It was either 6 innings or almost 6 innings, and he was taken out. Nobody said a word. Of course, he was taken out. Dusty Baker wasn't criticized for that. And everybody treated it as if it was a no-hitter. And Joel Sherman, God bless him, of the New York Post, went, a no-hitter is not the same thing as not allowing any hits.
Right. Sure.
And so again, it's a case where what baseball was, what its essential charms and enticements were, are being chipped away one by one, and until there's none left.
Well, and your framing with the Cape Cod League, both throughout the book, it is great because it romanticizes what used to be, and it also kind of juxtaposes where things are, for better or for worse, right? And I don't know, it almost feels like a stalemate at the end of the day, but with a glimmer of hope, right? I mean, like, for example, I'd love to. I know we've kind of gone near time here, but I do want to pull out like two little areas that I think your wisdom and the book kind of really either deeply talks about or certainly is in the arena of. One is the money thing, right? And you're kind of, for example, as a pushback, right? If we go from 162 to 154, right? In cold hard business logic and probably the Rob Manfred calculus, that means you're going to lose per team 6 games of inventory, right? And that inventory, right, is sellable stuff, right? And you multiply that by 30 or going on 32 teams, that's a lot of money that's going to be kind of taken out of the system, so to speak, right? So
yeah, maybe they can use it to pay off all the Tommy John surgery bills.
Maybe, but I mean, my point is that without that revenue, I mean, you look at the contracts and stuff. I guess the question in there is really about money. I mean, are we, with private equity and all that kind of stuff, is it too far gone to kind of maybe make some of these corrections, given that the money is too big and too whatever to be able to nip and tuck and maybe go back to some of these, things that you're kind of hoping to go back to somewhat?
I didn't hide this from you or anybody else here. I'm pretty left when it comes to things, and Marvin Miller was a hero to me. I kept thinking, why isn't he the head of the newspaper guild?
That's a good one.
God, what a smart man he was. And in the time since he left that job and this earth, ownership of both baseball teams has changed a lot. What used to be, in many cases, a family business isn't anymore. There are very few of those left. And people who got into it because they love baseball, as opposed to, as my friend Roy Eisenhart, whose father-in-law ran and owned the A's when Roy ran the team, as opposed to, multi-gazillionaires who don't get much ink for producing, I don't know, some little part of some little machine that's necessary and essential, and everybody needs to have it, and therefore they're very rich, but who knows who they are or cares? So owning a baseball team becomes a good way to, get yourself out there.
That's an asset class now.
Yeah, exactly. It's an asset class. So there's going to have to be some give somewhere. I would like to think that there is a solution, and Michael Halpert, my friend, the economist, posited one that is in fact a cap, which of course Bryce Harper and everyone else in the union says, no. Well, there are inequities in the way the money that is going out of owners' hands too. The Major League Baseball has the lowest average minimum salary. It's much less than the NBA or the NFL. Why is that? Why is it only 760,000? Now, I'm not saying that $760,000 is a schlubby kind of salary for a year, okay? But in the context of this business and the way it hands out money, it's not that much. Why does that make any sense? And what's gonna, there was some rancor and dissension in the last agreement where the old veterans like Scherzer, were pretty much calling the shots for the union guys, and the younger guys who are making 760 are like, what? How is this good for me? So I think it'll be very interesting to see how solidified that union membership remains. So Michael proposes a pretty straightforward cap that doesn't mean that the Dodgers have to give up their TV revenues. My friend Dan Oakert, who I actually blame for all this, Dan is the guy who created rotisserie league baseball, out of which grew the horrible thing called fantasy sports, which is multi-gazillion dollar industry. I said, okay, you screwed it, you fix it. You break it, you own it. What would you do? And he came up with a pretty similar system, which is you get a valuation of every team, you cut it in half, you give half of that pot to the players, in the sense that you give 1/30th to each team, and that's the pot you get to spend however you want to spend it. But it also rewards the more financially invested ownership groups by acknowledging that they get more of a share of the ownership part than other people. So, but that's still very much like a cap. And I don't know that that's ever going to go down with the baseball union. So what I came up with was sort of I hope it isn't half-assed, but okay, rich men have a real hard time accepting that there's any limitation on what they can do with their riches. That's part of the great American dream. Nobody can tell you what to do with your money. Well, yeah, they can, but all right. So if Steve Cohen wants to buy a World Series, though his effort to do so this year doesn't seem to be panning out
right.
well, again, so much for his promise that they would do it by 2025. Fine. Just make the luxury tax way more onerous than it is already, and use the system they've got to rectify the inequities. Because if you got it, spend it. Fine. Go ahead. We're not going to tell you how to spend your money. We recognize that you hate the idea of a cap. You're never going to accept a cap. Okay, spend what you want, but understand what that's going to mean in terms of how much you're going to have to give. And on the other hand, the owners of the franchises who are on the receiving end of these revenues that exist today, which in the CBA are by by mandate, they're supposed to be spent on players. Well, guess what? A lot of guys, a lot of owners didn't do that. They took the money, they took the competitive balance money that they received and didn't use it. They just pocketed it.
Or put it into real estate to build out ancillary businesses, which is a whole nother thing.
Right. And so, my grandmother would have said, that's a shonda. That's shameful. And there have to be penalties for that too. As of the last time I looked, there were still outstanding grievances against a couple of teams for not having spent the money they were given. One of them being the A's, and one of the reasons the A's started spending some money this year is they knew they were going to get killed if they didn't. But so there's a lot of bad actors in this. And I used to think that there were still some authority figures left in the world that you could respect and expect that they would be listened to. There's less and less of that. You might have noticed. So who's going to be the guy with a voice that gets people to listen to reason? Hard to listen to reason and all the shouting that goes on around these issues. But if it's the life or death of the game, maybe they do. There's usually a deal to be made if somebody is smart enough and creative enough to make it.
All right, let's end at something hopeful. And I'm glad you had you focused on this, because I think that this team, this thing is having a moment, right? We had Jesse Cole on this show about 2 years ago, before the Savannah Bananas really started to kind of blow up. And he was an enlightening conversation. You could see where he was trying to take this thing that he had, but wasn't fully sure about where it was going. And I love the fact that you brought them into the mixture here, and it feels hopeful, right? That this particular chapter and that the discussion around those what the Bananas have been doing, and some look derisively at it for sure. There's the Harlem Globetrotters thing, and it's not really baseball and all these wacky rules, and it's just a show. But it is more than that, right? And there's no mistake, right? They sell out wherever they go, and the fans seem to have a dynamite time.
They don't sell out 162 game schedules.
Fair enough. But what do you think it is about the Bananas?
Would you want to go see the Savannah Bananas, 15 times a year?
Probably not. And look, to their credit, or maybe discredit, they're trying to create a little league around it and stuff. Don't know. But I guess the point there is there's something there that they have realized by listening to the fans and trying to create something different. There's something in there for baseball probably to learn from, right? Not maybe full these rules completely, but there's something about like the entertainment factor making it, I don't know, more old school and more fun again. And I don't know. That feels hopeful.
That's Jesse's genius, frankly. Because certainly it isn't the dance moves of these guys and spikes, which is charming once and, okay, the third time through. No, he recognized, and it was right on the money, that baseball had been ignoring its fans and taking them for granted for a long time. And that the sense that everything fans could have once expected from a team was no longer true. You have tickets for a playoff game and you go up to Yankee Stadium and they don't tell you a word about whether the game is going to be played or not because of the rain delay for hours and hours. They just let you stand there buying beer. This is unconscionable. That is a screw you if ever I've heard one. The players have become estranged from the fans in ways that are structural. It's built into the system. It's built into the schedule. Dave Roberts pointed out a really simple thing. You used to go to the ballpark early to see batting practice because you wanted to see what Mickey was going to do. People, sports writers stopped what they were doing to look. The other team stopped to look. Well, they inverted it. I'm not sure when exactly, but they changed it. So now the home team takes batting practice first, and they're virtually gone from the field by the time their home fans come in. So that's a simple illustration of what they've got backwards. Yes, I realize that the transportation is hard and they got in late and da 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 da. So again, maybe you do need a shorter season. But there was never a sense that they are going out of their way to say, how can we make this great for you? It's like, we made this great game. We're the national, pastime, though, as Josh Bell of the Nats said to me, we are the pastime. You know, we don't need to pander to you. Yes, they do. And they really need to rethink that relationship, starting with letting all kids age 10 and younger, accompanied by an adult, get in free. We talked about the volume and the inventory of games and seats that go unsold. If you take a 10-year-old to the ballpark and he gets a, I don't know, $12 seat or a $15 seat for free, his mother, father, grandfather, uncle, whoever it is going to spend 3 times that much on stuff the kid wants to have. Maybe
it's an investment at that point.
Yes, it's an investment. And blessed Michael Halbert ran some numbers for me based on what the Cubs charge for, a small hot dog, a small soda, a cap, and I can't remember what else he put in that equation, but he calculated it based on, this is 2023, that the Cubs would have lost all of $4 million by doing that for that season, which as compared to the $21 million they paid Jason Hayward to play for the Dodgers. $4 million is chump change to them. And it's just such an obvious thing to do. They need a new generation of fans, and they need to give the new generation something new to see. That doesn't mean wearing glow-in-the-dark uniforms and breaking into tap dance. I would never want to see that in Major League Baseball either. But it does mean finding ways to allow people closer to the game, to the teams, to the players. You want a kid to want to play baseball? Let him onto the field. Let him see how big it is looking up from the pitcher's mound. Let him feel how soft that grass is and what really good dirt is like on your hands. Find the ways to bring them into the game, not just to the game.
Are you hopeful?
Yeah, I'm going to be commissioner.
Hopeful about the game's future.
When I'm commissioner, 10-year-olds are getting in free. There's going to be a taxi squad for pitchers so that the pitching staff becomes fluid, and you don't have to send people to outer Slobodkina and then bring them back. You can take your starter from the day before and like a hockey no dress, not dressed for the game kind of situation, and give a manager and a general manager flexibility to let the guys whose arms are already falling off by July because there's no starting pitcher going long enough, and they have to figure out how to piece together 21 outs. It's just give me 21 outs. That's all I need from you. Bullpens they're dead armed before they wake up in the morning on July 4th. So that's one of the ways. And yes, it means increasing the size of the roster and giving full benefits and to an additional number of players, perhaps 3. Make this doable. Make it doable for you to be a pitcher and not end up on the injured list for 2 years.
Or worse, down the road.
Or worse, down the road. Make a rule that you can't take a starting pitcher out except for injury until or unless he's given up a run in an inning. Hello. They used to say, that was a learning experience. He learned to work his way out of a jam. When's the last time anybody worked their way out of a jam in baseball? That was one of its charms. And it was a developmental step that you took, just like babies learning to pull themselves up on a chair.
Well, I do hope, Jane, that this book becomes the mantra for your candidacy. Well, how about that?
Yeah, I'm ready for it. Like Donald Trump, I will donate my salary.
There you go. You got a few more votes from that. There you go.
Yeah,
That's really magnanimous of you.
Yeah, I think there are really doable things. And I'm optimistic because isn't that what baseball is about? Didn't the Dodgers teach us that there's always next year? Yeah, help is coming. I'm available.
All right, our thanks to Jane. Much to think about and much more to consider in her new book. It's coming out tomorrow as we drop this episode. That'd be the 9th of September. It is the most anticipated sports book of the fall and then some. It is called Make Me Commissioner. I Know What's Wrong with Baseball and How to Fix It. And boy, I believe she does. It is published by our friends at Grand Central Publishing, and it is available wherever good books are found, of course, including through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode numbered 411 with myself and Jane, and you'll find a couple of convenient links there that will whisk you away to Amazon, and we'll get a couple of referral shekels of love when you purchase it in that manner. We appreciate that very much. That's a little indirect way to help us keep our lights on and stuff and help produce more of these great shows that hopefully you're enjoying as much as we enjoy making them for you. As I promised at the outset of the show, we'd love to give you, the listener, a copy of this book for free. We've got one copy of this hardcover treasure trove of opinion and stories here for you. And it is yours if you are the first person to email us at our web address. Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. The answer to this question: how many teams, minor league baseball teams, does the private equity entity known as Diamond Baseball Holdings now own? How many minor league baseball teams does Diamond Baseball Holdings, the private equity entity that now owns a whole bunch of them, how many teams do they own now in the minors? It's crazy once you find out, and it harkens to our previous conversations about big money in pro sports and all that kind of stuff. Be the first person to correctly identify that number. Tell me that number, the correct number, at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com, and you will win this book, and we'll be glad to send it to you as soon as we can get it to you. And when you enter, please, if you wouldn't mind just not only telling us your name, I'll obviously have your email address. I don't need anything more than that, but I would love to know how you listen to the show, via podcast or what feed you get it on. Do you listen on YouTube? However and when, give us a little bit of dynamics about how and where you consume this show. We appreciate that. Let's see. You can also follow Jane on various socials. I think the one she's most active on is on Instagram, and that's Leavy Jane. That's Leavy Jane, Jane. Leavy Jane. That's on Instagram. And her website, I can't forget her website. It's Jane Leavy, Leavy.com, janeleavy.com. There, not only will you see her, the promotional stuff for this book, but also you'll read all the background and accolades for some of her previous works. And I highly recommend you consider purchasing those books too, like Big Fella, Babe Ruth and the World He Created, as well as her biographies of Sandy Koufax and Mickey Mantle. Those are tremendous books, award-winning, all of them. And you can also, by the way, if you happen to be in the Washington, D.C. area in let's see, I think on the 28th of September, that's a little later this month, you can meet and greet and get a book signed by Ms. Jane Leavy at Politics and Prose. Yes, that very famous bookstore there in Northwest Washington, D.C. I think it's 5015 Connecticut Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 28th of September. There'll be other dates and stuff, too, that you could also find on, again, her website at janelevy.com. And if you happen to be there and you get a picture with her and you could tell her that you heard about her and the book through this show and send us that picture, great. We love to know that, too. We always love to know that we're having some effect on our guests getting some love and some purchases through this here little show. You can follow us on the various socials. We're at that's my email address. We said that before. That's hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can send us various correspondence there too, aside from the entries. But on socials, you'll find us on X. We're at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Blue Sky at goodseatsstillavailable.com. And you will find us just about everywhere else at Good Seats Still Available, including, by the way, YouTube, where we post and stream all of these episodes as well. A hat tip to our pal Jerry Payne for his audio excellence once again this week. Thank you, sir. And thanks for listening. Lots more coming your way in the weeks ahead. It's fall. It's a very busy season for us. Some very famous names coming at you in the next couple of months. So stay tuned to your feeds because you're going to really not want to miss any of those. Until then, be good to yourselves out there and take care of others too while you're at it.